Okay. Hello and welcome. I want to thank you all for joining our session this morning. There was so many great sessions to choose from. We're delighted you are all here. So that's great. My name is Andrea Niosi, and I'm a librarian and also an SLO coordinator at City College of San Francisco. And I am joined by Janie Skinner and Nathan Steele, who are also SLO coordinators. Janie leads the SLO team and the SLO committee and takes the lead on institutional level assessment reporting. And Nathan is the main liaison for the curriculum committee and the SLO team together. Together, we make up the City College SLO team. Okay, slide. Today, we will be sharing our meta assessment. Essentially, it's an assessment of our college assessment practices. I'll start off by walking you through our SLO process to provide the context for the meta and give a brief overview of what we were trying to answer by conducting the assessment. Then Janie will continue by showing the data, first the results from our review of course section level SLO reporting, and secondly, the common themes that emerged from the many guided conversations we had with committees and groups of faculty from around our campus. We hope to have some time for discussion and answering of any questions.
And if I just chime in to say, if you have questions as we go, there's a question and answer field box like chat that you can put questions in.
Thanks. So what does SLO assessment look like at City College? Okay, prior to 2012, CCSF did not have an institutional assessment plan that set parameters and guided the SLO assessment process for departments and programs. Some faculty had embraced a process on their own and used it to improve their courses and programs, but it was inconsistent and varied. We had an accreditation crisis in 2012, and after that, we quickly developed a new process. And the college developed a plan and also implemented CurricuNet, a management system which ties curriculum development, outcome assessment, and program review together into one system. For over a decade, we've followed the same plan and process. Every instructor engages in SLO assessment each semester as part of their professional responsibilities. Their contribution has a large impact on the entire system. Outcome assessment is tied to the curriculum development and modification cycle, program review, service improvements, and institutional reports. Slide. So why a meta assessment? After nearly a decade of faculty working with the same process each semester, we felt it was time to take a closer look at our practices to see where improvements could be made. The meta is comprised of a review of our course section level assessment reports and many guided conversations with faculty groups. The intention is to better understand where and how SLO assessment is helping the college and where there's room for improvements. So are the assessments valid? Given the importance of this section level data to the whole system, we needed to review those assessments. And to what extent do section level assessments lead to improvements? We hope to find evidence of this in the reports. And if not, we want to know what drives course and program improvements and how SLO assessment could inform that. Other questions we sought to answer are if there were identifiable barriers that could be addressed to improve the process, and what changes to the process might make assessment more meaningful to all. We already knew that some faculty weren't finding meaning in the SLO process, and some find it tedious, time-consuming, and not so useful. To what extent was this true? We didn't know, and we wanted to explore. Also, many conduct SLO assessment in isolation by themselves, and so with minimum dialogue with other faculty or students. And we wanted to know how we could improve upon that. Checking the validity of assessment reports and learning more from faculty through dialogue seemed to be the next step for our college. And so the time was right for this assessment. Go ahead. So before we jump into meta, I want to explain our process just a little bit. In a nutshell, our system for assessing and reporting on learning outcomes requires instructors to assess and report on at least one SLO for each course section each semester. All SLOs in a course must be assessed at least once within a 6-year period. And overall, the course and program, we call them aggregate assessments, are required as part of the curriculum review process. This requirement prompts faculty to review SLO assessment data across multiple years and multiple outcomes prior to every course or program modification, so that the SLO data can help inform those changes. The course section level data that is gathered each semester is rolled up through mapping, and not only in those course and program aggregate reports, but also to general education outcomes and institutional learning outcome assessment reports. So it's a really important process. Go ahead. There's many positives to our process that I want to highlight before we go into the meta. It's robust in many ways. You know, there's broad and consistent participation by all faculty, which is important. And our mappings support course, program, general education, and institutional level assessments. These large data sets of map data accompanied by other measures that we use make up for rich institutional level reports that everybody can look at and use. Aggregate course and program assessment reports over several years help to inform course and program revisions. And also we've just added a new Tableau tool for departments to review alongside course success rates when they're doing the program review process. So our system continues to evolve, and this meta assessment also sheds light on how it can evolve further to bring more meaning to the process and help faculty lessen opportunity gaps and support equity. So that's it in a nutshell. Janie, do you want to talk more about the meta? Great.
Sorry, I muted myself and then I couldn't find the unmute button. Yes, I'm happy to talk about the meta. Let me just answer one question that came up in the chat though. People asked if ILO and JELOs are the same thing or the same language, and they're not at our college. We're a college that both has a lot of GE courses aimed towards degrees and transfer, and we have a lot of CTE and lifelong learning and non-credit programs at our college. And so we have four institutional learning outcomes that derive from our mission, that with the idea that all students who come to our college and participate in any kind of program would get some of that, things like improved communication, improved critical thinking, social and cultural awareness, personal and professional development. Those are our institutional outcomes. And in our mapping system, our programs, all our degrees and certificates, whether they're credit or non-credit, they map to our institutional learning outcomes. Whereas our GE outcomes, those are for all courses that count for a general education in an associate's degree. And so courses that meet sciences, communication, English, humanities, social sciences, et cetera, those all our courses map to GEs. So we have kind of, we draw different reports and their mapping is a little different for GE and for institutional learning outcomes. And I also saw a question of whether our program assessment uses common assignments across a program. Each program can define how they do it. At the moment, that's not what we do as our aggregate reporting. For the most part, aggregate reporting would aggregate the data from section level courses that are part of that program. And then in the report, people often incorporate other information like feedback from advisory committees or the number of people in a CTE program who are getting jobs, other kinds of data might be incorporated there. But each program can define how they want to assess it. So if they wanted to do a common assessment across all courses in a program, they could. That's it for the questions right now, right? So let's jump into our meta assessment. One of the things we wanted to ask is how well are our SLO practices serving us? And as we thought about it, we thought there's kind of like 4 levels or sort of a step ladder from maybe less challenging or urgent to more challenging and urgent of purposes of SLO assessment. The first bottom line baseline is we absolutely needed to meet accreditation requirements, which at the time we started, we weren't quite meeting. Now we are definitely, that's not a concern at this point, but it is still a baseline we always need to meet. Next thing we want to do with learning assessment is to know are students actually learning what we think we're teaching, right? If I think that I'm teaching them how to apply public health concepts to public health issues, do I have evidence that they learned how to do that? That's my field, public health. The next level is we really want to use assessment to promote critical reflection and dialogue at the college, and then have that dialogue and that data feed into continuous improvement by actively using our assessments to improve teaching and learning. And so we were kind of asking how well, if we think about these different purposes of SLO assessment, we were pretty sure we were meeting the baseline, but how much of the others were we? What we have done is sort of, we think of it as kind of like 4 steps. The first was we did a review of what we call our CRN or section level course assessments, just to get a snapshot of our data quality, because we rely so much on mapping. That section level assessment feeds into our course assessment, our program assessment, our GE assessment, and our institutional learning outcome assessment. So we wanted to see how good are these reports. The second thing we did, and this is really where we spent most of our time so far, has been in conversations with different bodies at the college to gather some perspectives, get some of their views on assessment. And I will say too, I think we started this after after we were already in a pandemic period. So that also has been, it's been looming over. Initially, for example, starting conversations about this in the middle of a pandemic wasn't everyone's top priority, right? And it also meant that most of our conversations have been virtual. We're now in this green starred place. We're sharing results out and exploring different options, and have some pilot projects we'll tell you about, and we'll be moving into recommending improvements and possibly changes to our institutional assessment plan. So step 1 is our review of section level, and I'm sorry, it's kind of we call them CRNs, but course registration numbers, but what we mean is a section of a course, section level reporting, because every teacher for every section assesses at least 1 SLO every semester. So it's a big body of data. We pulled 400 reports to review from 2 semesters that were pre-pandemic. We stratified them just to make sure we were getting somewhat representative or proportional sample to the enrollment at our college. So credit and non-credit, CTE, which is career and technical education, and non-CTE or more academic classes. And so, for example, if 40% of our courses are CTE courses, we pulled 40% of the sample. That's what I mean by proportional. Then we did it randomized in the sense that we sorted our courses and then pulled a randomized sample from each of those 4 areas. And we had 2 reviewers, so 2 sets of eyes on each of those reports, so a total of 800 rankings. And we used a rubric to review these that we developed with our SLO committee, which is a college-wide committee, part of our academic senate, although it does have representation also of administrators and sometimes students. So the light blue is kind of the good color, you could say here. Light blue was, it ranked, we had a 3-point ranking, 0, 1, or 2. Yes, 2 meant, yes, it has this quality, or there's substantial evidence of this. 1 meant, yeah, there's some, or it's unclear. And 0, which is the dark blue color, meant no or none. We didn't see evidence of this in the report we reviewed. So some of it was, these first 2 were just really basic. Were the fields filled out? Did they have information? Yeah, most of them did. Were they responsive to the prompts? Did they answer the question we asked? For the most part, we did. And what was really helpful here was where it was unclear or they didn't, it tended to be to one question prompt that we realized was confusing. So we will be changing that prompt. This third column is the one we were most excited to see, which was, is this specifically outcome assessment versus a ranking that is based on the overall grade of the student for the semester, for example? Because we found, I don't know if this is true at your colleges, but there's been some confusion about that grading versus outcome assessment. And so if the report said, we ask on our reports for them to rank students according to whether they met the SLO, they're developing it, but they haven't quite met it, or there's no evidence that this student knows how to do this competency yet. If what we saw people reporting was students who got an A for the course met the SLO, then we know they're looking at grades overall. They're not looking at specifically an assignment that's matched to that outcome. And here we can say at least more than 75% of our students, more than 50%, we were, yes, clearly this is outcome assessment. And then another 30%, we're like, we think it's outcome assessment, but maybe it's a little unclear how they said it. But less than, maybe only 20% were ones where we were like, this is not outcome assessment as far as we can tell. And so actually that was a big relief for us, because given how important the section reports are, the fact that most of them seem to be outcome assessment was a good sign of reliability of our data. There's clearly room for improvement, but it's pretty good. Then look at these 2. These were more the text boxes where we asked people to reflect on teaching and learning or improvements they made or planned. Here, less than 25% were substantial. And our overall quality, we had less than 25% that were bad, but most were in the middling area. So what did we also stratified it, as I said, by CTE and credit or non-credit. So we had 4 categories and kind of compared across there. One thing that was interesting to note was that our non-credit CTE reports were especially strong, which was not something we knew. We might want to have some of those people come share on a panel about what they're doing for others on the campus. So what did we learn from this? Most reports do seem to reflect outcome assessment. Few, right? Because this is the basis of our whole system. So that means that our data is relatively reliable, even though, as I said, there's some room for improvement. We saw some reflection on teaching and learning and plans for improvement in these reports, but not very much. But we weren't sure how to interpret that. Is that really a missed opportunity that we want to promote more for people to do? Or is this actually a reasonable choice for faculty to make, given how few people actually read these reports? Are people doing reflection, but it's not being shown here? We don't know. And clearly, some of our prompts need to be written more clearly. And we may also want to change some prompts to ask people to think about something different. We then went on to our next step of conversations. We've actually, since we wrote our report, we've had a few more conversations sharing out our report, but around 16 conversations from 12 different campus groups, which varied from about 10 minutes on an agenda to having a full 90 minutes or 60 minutes with people. These were different committees, like our Student Equity Strategies Committee, our Program Review Committee, our CTE Committee, Deans and Chairs, the Department Chair Council, and various others that we, obviously the SLO Committee, and a few different department meetings, kind of convenience-based, those we participate in, and some student leaders. So what we heard here, Andrea mentioned that we already knew that many faculty found SLO assessment fairly tedious and not very useful. And we heard that quite a bit in these conversations. So that wasn't just the squeaky wheel that we're hearing. It was actually quite a lot of people experienced that. And we heard that for most people, they report this, they're in the routine, they do it, but they're doing it out of a sense of compliance and accreditation requirements, not because they find an intrinsic value in it. So that's, to me, a big wake-up call, not just for our college, but probably for this community that is interested in SLOs, that comes to a conference about it. If many of our faculty are not finding value in it, then we have to do something about that. Not just tell them it has value. We need to find ways to make sure it has value. Where there is dialogue and collaboration, where people were talked about that within a program or among a group of teachers teaching the same class, then or related classes, maybe classes in a sequence, their faculty said we do find value. That seemed to be the key to finding value, was having more dialogue and collaboration on it. And we saw that there was a really unrealized potential to use SLO assessment to improve student equity and reduce opportunity gaps. We found very few examples, even among faculty who are very committed to equity and who have participated in different initiatives around equity at our college. They're not necessarily using SLO assessment as part of that. They might be using course completion data and other kinds of data. So it's not that they're not data informed, but SLO data hadn't really been useful in this area yet. We also detected a strong tension, and you guys may be able to relate to this, between wanting to make the SLO processes more useful and wanting to make them more efficient and streamlined. So we would hear from people who are like, it takes me 3 hours and it's the end of the semester and I'm tired and I've already done grades. I just want this to be faster. Why do I have to fill out X, Y, Z, right? But we also heard, well, it's most useful when there's dialogue, when there's planning, when we look at the data together, when we have a specific meeting about it, all of which is not particularly streamlined, right? So there's sort of this tension between making it more useful versus making it more efficient. And I don't think we've figured out yet how to resolve that. We found people talking about 3 different promising directions to improving our assessment practices: increasing dialogue, designing assessments in ways that we get more actionable data, and leveraging technology in our assessment practice. And let me just pause here for a second and see if there are any questions before I go into this section. Anything we should answer? Nope, nothing in the Q&A yet. One of the promising directions, I'd say probably the one we heard the most about, was increasing dialogue. Dialogue about teaching and learning seems to, at least faculty, perceive it as directly contributing to improvement. But dialogue doesn't happen as routinely as it might, and it's seldom documented in SLO reports. I remember one department chair said at a meeting, talking about how we teach is the most important thing, and it's the least amount of time we spend on any meeting agenda. It's just not what we get to, because we have to go over, oh, there's a new policy, or there's a new technology, this is how you do Adobe Sign, right? And so they don't, talking about exactly how we teach and learn, there isn't enough space for that. Some of the opportunities were maybe to produce and encourage people to have more dialogue in the process of doing course and program aggregate assessment. Having more dialogue about student learning outcomes with students directly. Students themselves said that this was valuable to them, that they appreciated it when teachers did that, when they made it explicit what assignments related to what competencies and why those competencies were important in the real world. And when they asked students what their own learning outcome goals were for this semester. Through existing and new faculty learning communities, this has been a rich place of dialogue in our college for those participating in it. And this would be an area where increasing both student equity and student achievement SLO data could be used for. Flex days. When we first were rolling out the new, well, now not new, the 10-year-old SLO process, we had a number of kind of full flex day events. We had discussions of SLOs at departments, at school levels. We now have in our guided pathways process, academic and career communities. And people said, I'd like that. I'd like to get out of the silo of my department and talk at a school level or maybe an ACC level. So, we need to talk with our PD community about maybe doing that next year. Having more dialogue between student services, academic services side of the house, and instruction side of the house around outcomes and how those work together. Through more dialogue around our GE and ILO reporting processes, and then as a component of planning efforts at the college, like an educational master plan. A second promising direction was around more conscious assessment design so that we get actionable data. I'll tell you personally, I'm someone who is bought into SLO assessment. I'm a health educator. We really focus in health education as my professional training on outcome assessment, on SMART assessment, all these things. Like I've been trained in that. I believe in that. I consult for organizations on how to do that. I do it in my classes, and I can't point to too many concrete improvements I've made in my teaching as a result of SLO assessment. And so it's even for those of us who are bought into it, maybe thinking about how do I assess differently next time so that I do get actionable data. In addition, we're not all bought into it. And so we're also talking about a culture shift from doing assessment mainly for compliance purposes to taking a more experimental approach to identifying specific strengths and weaknesses in student learning. And that means we also have to have a culture shift towards learning and not compliance for us as faculty, so that I don't have faculty who are afraid, oh my God, if my SLO assessment has always been 85% and 90%, and I change how I do it, and I show that only 50% of my students meet the outcome, am I going to get in trouble, right? And we want to have a learning environment where we say, no, you don't get in trouble. You learn something new. What are you going to do with that information? You assessed it a new way. You've got a different outcome. What are you going to do with that information? Not make it punitive because you didn't get 85, 90%, right? This relates to maybe for some folks, different departments define, as I said, we have 3 levels in our ranking that we report in Curricunet. Student meets the SLO, students developing it but hasn't quite met it, or there's no evidence the student knows how to do this competency. They might know how, but they haven't showed that they know how. In my department, we set early on, meets SLO equals 70% and up, because we figured a C counts for a certificate or degree. It counts for transfer. That's what we'll say meets SLO. But almost all of our students get a C or better unless they drop the course. So we might not see if all of our students are at 90, 95% for our outcomes. We can't detect any improvement because there's no room on the scale to move up, right? I'm going up from 98 to 99%. Like, what does that mean? So some groups may want to move their scale down so that they can detect that improvement better. Making the assessment more authentic. Some people, particularly in our CTE meeting, said, I want to be able to show you a video in my report and just say, here's where you change the carburetor, right? I don't want to have to write this out. So thinking about how do we make assessment more authentic? How do we make it tied into what's important for students to know? And bringing equity data and SLO assessment together more effectively. We do this in our GE reports, particularly where we do look at disaggregated student data. We don't disaggregate, we do collect disaggregated student data, but we don't feed back to our faculty at the course or section level disaggregated data by, say, race and ethnicity or gender, partly because the N is just so small, right? In one class, one section. But that means that people haven't necessarily been bringing together SLO assessment with equity, and it's something we have to think about how to do better. We also just this year incorporated some SLO assessment data that is disaggregated by equity groups into our program review data set, our Tableau for chairs writing program review. So we're working on this, but we just haven't done enough yet. And lastly, right now, many program aggregate reports rely primarily on course level data, but there's pros and cons of that. And in other cases, we may want to assess program outcomes directly within a major or a certificate. Certainly in CTE, there's often some kind of capstone or final assessment that does that. In our academic majors where say my area, health education, my health education class includes both majors and non-majors. So does the course data help me assess the major? I'm not sure, right? So that's something where we might want to do something differently. In terms of leveraging technology, we're kind of looking from the simple to the very complex. The most simple is improving our prompts that we use for reporting in Curricunet, which is the program reporting software we use, as Andrea said. A medium one might be to support departments to track and compare better their data across programs or within programs. This might be something we can do by bringing data into Tableau or into even an Excel sheet to make it easier for faculty to use that technology and use the data better. And a bigger lift is right now, our Canvas is not set up such that we could export data for course, program, or GE assessment. To do that would require a big lift from our IT and EdTech teams. And so it's something we're exploring, but it's not something it's in our short-term plans. Our next phases are to, we have a few pilot programs that are just asking groups of faculty in a department or an area, are there some new approaches you would like to try out? That could be anything from more dialogue, a different timing of assessment, new technology, any experiment. You want to try it out, we'll be there to help you, and we want to learn from you so that we learn more about what works. The GE reports and ILO reports, we are asking for more feedback on how they're used and how they could be improved. I think they do great at just documenting where we are as sort of a measure in time of where we are with these different measures, but are they being used? Convening more dialogue, that came up before, for example, a college-wide Flex event, and then equity, finding more ways to bring together data and discussion of equity and SLOs. We took a first baby step towards that in December at our SLO committee. We invited representatives from about 12 different other committees on campus to come to our SLO committee and talk about how in the new ACCJC standards, community college standards, for those of you who aren't in our California community colleges, we're actually being required to look at student learning outcome and equity together. Whereas before they were kind of parallel tracks, we're being invited to look at them more together. That's not something that 3 SLO coordinators can do alone. It's not something 1 SLO committee can do alone. That's a big lift, and it's going to be a college-wide effort. So just to start the conversation around how do we do that, we brought together representatives from a variety of committees to start talking about it. And we'll probably do something like that again. Here's some examples of the pilots that we're trying. As I said, the pilots, it's not like piloting one new idea. It's really just experiments. So one experiment in the library information technology program is trying to use the Canvas outcomes function in our, learning, our Canvas we use for our classes to automate outcome assessment more. And it has really also provoked just a lot of valuable dialogue among faculty around how do we align our assignments and all to the outcomes at the course and program level. Timing is something the humanities faculty are experimenting with. They want to experiment with, instead of assessing 1 SLO every semester for every class, they want to assess all their SLOs in a single semester, look at all the data together, try out some changes, and then reassess in 18 months or 2 years. Another department, visual media design, they want to use more dialogue about their capstone classes and specifically bring together a structured dialogue of faculty and students. Or one thing we've explored, we haven't actually implemented, but explored with the ESL department, is assessing a similar outcome across a bridging class, the high level non-credit to introductory credit ESL, and look at how assessment of a specific competency and how that bridges across that, that area for students, and what can we learn by that instead of just assessing each class alone. So we have some questions for you we'd love your input on, but before we go there, I want to open it up and see if there are any questions you all have for us. Let me look at the chat here. Love these comments. Yes, dialogue, culture shift. Yes, we do use Curricunet for SLOs right now and for program review and course curriculum development. Yeah, buy-in. Yep. Do you all have questions? If you do, maybe you can raise hands. We can answer any questions you have. If not, we have some questions for you.
There is a question about, are we happy with Curricunet? And I was just trying to think of how to answer that.
I think that's a yes and no, right?
Yeah, it's a kind of a yes and no. The mapping of it is really great, and the interconnectivity on some levels, but it, like any system, it can be improved upon. And I have nothing to compare it to myself.
Yeah.
So that kind of hinders my
Yeah.
answer.
For about a year before we started using Curricunet, we just used Google Sheets. It's better than Google Sheets. Laura.
Thank you so much. I'm actually the one who asked the question about the Curricunet. Do you like having all of your systems? So this is something, I'm at Santa Barbara City College, and we do not, so like our SLOs are in Illumin, our curriculum is in Curricunet, and program review is in Google Sheets for all intents purposes. So nothing is connected. There's good and bad things about that. And I'm really interested in hearing if you like having everything connected, because I see the pros of that, but I've heard horror stories from other colleges who've done that with other companies. So I'm like, I'm interested, because we're looking at shopping around, and I have a lot of say on this. And so I'm trying to hear what other schools have found and what you guys think.
And Enrique, were you going to respond to that?
Yeah, I can kind of. So Laura, I think I can speak only on behalf of Fresno City College. I can speak on what you're doing. We had different multiple databases. We had Illumin, track that to track different things. We're currently using Curricunet. We have the Curricunet module up at live and running. We have the program review module incorporated into Curricunet. We also have the SLO module incorporated into Curricunet, and so it would be a one-stop shop data type of database that we're integrating within one system, one database. That's working out fine for us.
Yeah.
So we have.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. I would say there's a lot of potential there, and like, for example, what's great when you're doing a program review and you have an assessment that you want to tie to a resource request, you can click that you can add it to a resource request. So the data is tied to that resource request. And so that's really neat. You can't do that if the systems are not separate. I mean, you could do it with a link or something, but so that's really powerful. However, it's only for that particular year. So we haven't figured out how to tie an assessment from 2 years ago to a program review of, this year. So it's got some quirks, right? But the potential, and if there's some really unique things that are good about it, that are good. One thing that I can say that is negative, and maybe that's the way we set it up. We set up our student service outcome template for assessment so that it's not mapped to ILOs, right? So there's no mapped data for that we can tie those assessments, and we almost need to just develop a new template for those types of assessments that ask different questions, but we haven't done that. So it's really important, I think, if you're going to go with that system, to really think about what do you want connected? You know, what questions do you want in those templates that you build out in Curricunet? Because it might have been really important to ask questions that get aggregate, you know, that are mapped, that tie in the number of students, you know, in student services that were assessed, and you could add that between all the services, and we can't do that. And maybe that's because we didn't set it up that way. So I would be, so it's got some pros and cons, and
It's got some pros and cons. Like I said, I haven't used anything else. I would say that Curricunet is not highly intuitive. So really, especially, I don't know, faculty who are new need a hand-holding to learn how to use it. It's not intuitive. And even if you've done it before, if you're only touching it once a semester to file a report, or less, if your reporting is less frequent, people will forget how to use the software, and it's not that intuitive. So that might be one advantage to using a different product for SLO assessment. But I don't know, I do kind of think it's cool that all the information fits together. Nathan, by being a chair and curriculum committee and SLO, you might have a sense of the importance of that all fitting together.
Yeah, I mean, because I do love having big data on some level, but to go back to the very first question, it's like, is there a standard approach to assessment and all of the things that we talk about in terms of dialogue? And Curricunet doesn't, at least in its current form, doesn't really seem to facilitate or encourage that. So we need other processes that are going to facilitate that dialogue and then flow into, you know, better answers in these Curricunet fields. The other thing I'll say is, like, as things change dramatically, like all of these CalGETSI changes that are coming for the California college system, like, that's a lot of moving pieces in this big sort of like, you know, program. And so it feels like, and we're a big college with lots of courses. And so there's lots of places where things kind of feel like they break in some places. I think that's inevitable with technology. But yeah, I'll just go back to, there are pros and cons. And I think this question about how well Curricunet integrates with other systems is a good one, because thinking about integrations with Canvas and maybe Curricunet is going to have some limits.
Yeah. Let me respond to another question I see in the chat, which is, what's your assessment leadership and support structure? So it's a faculty-led process at our college. So each of the three of us get some release time, anything from 0.2 to 0.6 release time to work on SLO related work and SSO related work. Andrea is our student services, academic services outcomes person. We have the director of planning works with us very closely, and up through the Office of Research, work very closely with them, and our was it Dean of Institutional Improvement? Is that Pam's title? I'm not sure. And so we work through, basically under the academic side of the house, except for the student services part is under the student development, student support side of the house. And some of the, none of us are professional researchers or data crunchers. Initially, some of the people who were most involved with our work were scientists who were more statistically astute, I would say. And so we do rely on some of the, our like the mapping of demographic data to SLO data and cleaning up data sets. That's done by our research team. And then they give us data that we then work to analyze and get consultation from relevant departments and or, just different bodies at the college. And then in terms of our institutional learning outcome and GE reports, we try to use multiple measures. So we try to bring in some additional measures in addition to the quantitative data from Curricunet. So sometimes that's another survey that has happened at the college that's relevant. Sometimes that's holding a Flex Day event and documenting the comments we get about the area. sometimes it's so different sources of additional data to try to get a more rounded picture. Let me go to asking you guys a couple questions with the minutes we have left, if that's all right. We're still in the middle of this, or maybe we're still in the midst of this meta assessment. And maybe some of you all are also thinking about how well is assessment working at your college. 3 questions we had, and kind of the most important ones in the middle maybe, is what changes are you making to SLO assessment to improve student equity, to bring in the equity lens to SLO assessment? What indicators would you look at to see if whether assessment is working or not working at your college? And then how do you incentivize and support more meaningful assessment? Because that's really what we're aiming to produce out of this process. And I'm just curious to hear from anyone. Has anyone just raised your, yeah, Laura. I can't see hands for some reason. Enrique.
Janie, wouldn't that be, well, your question, isn't that depends if, because some of us do, assessments at the student level, some of us do it at the course level. Wouldn't that depend on which level you're asking for? Because if you're asking at the student level, that's a richer data. You're going to get richer analysis through rubrics, through whatever assessment methodologies you're using, right? And so that's a loaded question.
Yeah, and our because we do have disaggregated data, we are hoping that students are individually assessed to go into what we're looking at the course. But of course, we could look at it. We don't have to do it that way, and I think about how, for me, if I'm looking at an opportunity gap in a class I teach where I'm not happy with differential outcomes, say by race and ethnicity or gender, if SLO assessment seems to have this promise to help me figure out, is there a bigger gap on one competency than another? And then if I could address that gap in that competency, maybe my students would finish the class at a more equitable rate. But I haven't necessarily known how to do that yet. So, yeah, Karen.
Yeah, first of all, I really applaud all your efforts to do a deep dive and figure out what's working and how to strengthen it. Really concrete plans moving forward. I think that's awesome. I think what we've been conceiving of in terms of equity is a lot of times we look at the results, and what we could do is we could look the other way, which is at our actual assessments. And so I'm thinking of some of the faculty I've worked with on my campus, they're reconceiving even how you structure the assignment. For instance, we might have had an over-reliance on writing essays or short essay questions in order to demonstrate their knowledge. But what if, because our students are so media savvy now, instead they made a recording being able to demonstrate that same information, or a podcast, or some different means to demonstrate their understanding as opposed to relying on the old methods. That's something that I really appreciated, is just using different media to show their competencies. And I'd be curious if other people here are also seeing an embracing of what they're considering authentic assessments too. So as opposed to those exams that are high stakes, midterm and final exams, how they may be more breaking it up into more discrete parts or different ways, more hands-on demonstrations, as opposed to just repeating back information.
Can I, because I'm feeling what Karen is talking about. I feel like so much we think about assessment as this thing that we do at the end of the semester. And again, it's like more of the compliance stuff. All right, let's go in, and we kind of are flying blind a little bit. But if we have more ideas and we think about assessment as creativity and a possibility to like try something new, and we go into the assessment process with questions and more more critical thinking on the front end of how we're doing assessment, as instead of what I think comes along with the compliance thing is like, well, all right, maybe let me look at my own data and let me look at where these achievement gaps. We have a sense, and we should like have more creative energy. And I think imagining different kinds of assignments, thinking again about who our students are, like that means assessment is something that should really kind of happen with dialogue before the semester even starts. And then I think that will get people excited and participate in this culture shift, get buy-in, so that we do start to think about it as an opportunity for self-improvement.
Yeah. And
Even being more flexible with due dates makes a huge impact with how we teach and get the engage with students, because we're being really rigid with that doesn't work for everybody, having things in by, so even little fixes like that can help with are they actually meeting the outcome? Well, they might be, they just might not be meeting it on that. And not to say that timing isn't important, but if people are lead busy lives, I don't know. I mean, and can still meet the outcome, right?
absolutely. Julie.
Potential answers to both the first two questions. One of the indicators I think that we have really shifted to looking at my institution is when I first came into my assessment director role, we were mostly doing class assessment, individual faculty doing individual items, as opposed to looking more holistically across, common course assessment or, even some of these bigger kind of program questions. And so I think, an indicator, and it sounds like you did this has been a great presentation, by the way, I love it, took a lot of notes. That I really, that I think it's, how much are faculty thinking through these questions together? Because I think that's going to help with that dialogue. Like, thinking, and this is a little hard if you've got that situation. Sounds like humanities is going to do it. If you're trying to assess every outcome in a course, that's trickier. Like, we have tried to talk to faculty more about like, what's the burning question that students are really struggling with, and how can you talk to your colleagues and think through how you can gather data to see where they're at, what types of implementations you can do. So I think that that's been really helpful. I don't know that we've made a lot of progress on the equity piece either. We've got institutional data that's disaggregated, so we can start looking at that. We're trying to connect to other committees that do this work, but our Center for Teaching and Learning Engagement does a faculty course teaching faculty how to use the Peralta equity rubric. And we haven't done like a formal assessment of that training course, but I would love to find a way to do kind of a pre and post, looking at, because the first course you can take is just about the equity rubric. Then there's a second course where you actually change your own personal course to align. And I'd love to see a way to measure that, because I think that really helps get at that equity question.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Julie, I hope you don't mind if I follow up with you. I'd love to see more about just maybe have a follow-up conversation around how you are holding those conversations around helping a cluster of faculty to identify students' burning questions or stumbling blocks.
Yeah, well, part of the reason I asked what your structure is, we are also a community college. I'm in Arizona, and we have 19 academic departments, and we have an embedded faculty member who serves as the liaison in each department. And so they do a lot of the support work. And part of it is we decided as a team that we were just not really going to let people do class assessment anymore. We were just going to say, you got to do common course assessment. And, the faculty who don't, they don't. But we just sort of made an institutional shift there, and that has really helped us.
Great.
Question.
We have about 5 minutes. Is that right, Monique?
Going back, are there data coaches? You have like data coaches within your own division that deal with SLO data or any other type of data?
No.
We
don't-
have, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Andrea.
I was just thinking about, we have our SLO team right now, there's 3 of us. We have drop-in, we provide professional development opportunities during Flex Day and other professional development days, but we also have drop-in schedules where we promote, come see us, we'll walk you through, we try to connect with new faculty. And that's on the instructional side of the house, right? On the service side of the house is very different. We have a student service department have representatives that meet twice a month with all together to discuss outcome assessment. So that's a different model altogether for the services.
Thank you.
The other thing I could throw in really quick that we've done, I don't know whether you'd have the able to do it. I think most institutions could. We have, we call them assessment developers. They're kind of our educational support staff. They're probably similar to what the roles that you're in. Although I think you're in, multiple roles that we've maybe have more divided out. But we connected with a faculty librarian and as one of our assessment developers, and this faculty librarian's role is to work with faculty to do the library research on, what types of assessments might be available, what types of interventions might be available, so that faculty maybe could move a little bit away from intuitive practice and more toward evidence-based practice. And it's just been a nice connection with our library services that I think, we sort of overlooked for a number of years.
That's awesome.
That's very cool.
And makes me think about, we're often talking about dialogue like within our unit and our program, I think, but imagining dialogue that stretches to include different kinds of student support services is critical in how we get better at all of this.
Yeah, I think that to make our processes more effective, we also, we've gone broad, but we haven't gone as deep. And I think in the process of going more deep, we might not go as broad, right? Because, if we were only looking at courses where there's multiple sections, we have a lot of courses there aren't multiple sections of, right? So, that might be a period of time in which we don't assess those. We assess the ones that have, or I'm also part of the Student Equity Strategies Committee. And at one point we identified about, 8 courses that we called bottleneck courses that had high enrollment of underrepresented students and didn't have high pass rates, to figure out what could we do in those courses and focus on that, right? So I think there's, or they may have had decent pass rates, but they had high gaps. They had high opportunity gaps. And so figuring out, it might be that we've been very committed to getting all the data, and it would be a real culture shift at our college to say, we're going to do 3-year cycles of some of the data and some of the data, so it would be interesting to explore. I want to respect our time, and let me just show our last slide, which is this is how you reach us. We're at City College of San Francisco, so that's ccsf.edu/SLO. Our interim meta reports on the homepage, and then you'll also see a link to assessment data where you can read any of our GE and ILO reports. You can email us at slocoordinator@ccsf.edu. And let me see if there's anything else in the chat. This looks great. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for spending this time with us. It's a rich discussion on our end as well, and we will make the slides available through the SLO Symposium.
Andrea, Nathan, thank you so much for, and Jenny, thank you so much for participating, making this event wonderful for everybody.
Thank you for having us.
And Enrique, any reminders you need to give folks, or it's just
The reminders will be just, we have a quick 15-minute breaks. The session 2 will be starting at 11:15. So thank you.
Thank you all.
appreciate all of you.
Yeah. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, really appreciate you guys coming.